Hello. My father left our family when I was 10 and returned 5 years later. How and why did it happen? It's hard to understand even now, but I'll try to explain in the best way I can. As you can imagine, my parents' relationship was difficult. I still remember how when I was 10, they would argue all the time, and I didn't really understand why, because I was a kid. But then one day, my father was just gone. He just left us and went somewhere else. I didn't know why, but I was sure it was my fault, and I would cry constantly, especially when I realized he was not coming back. I was angry at my mom too, but of course it wasn't her fault. She was, and still is, a hardworking woman. And after my father left us, she worked 2 jobs at once just to keep us warm and fed. 5 years have passed since then, and I have gotten used to the fact that my father isn't coming back. But I was all right at this point. I had a good relationship with my mother, and well, a guy from my school name became very interested in me, and I liked his attention and I liked him, but I was a little bit scared to start dating. Basically, our life was very stable. But then one day, my mom told me that my father called her and that he wanted to come over. I was shocked, and Mom said that if I didn't want that to happen, we could just say no. But honestly, I did want to see him, and I wanted for everything to go back to normal. It was funny that even after 5 years, I still knew that something was not normal. After a few days, he arrived. It was so weird seeing him after so many years. He was a little bit fatter and a little bit balder, but he was still my father. It was surreal. We sat down in our living room and he started to talk. He said that he was in a very bad place when he left us. He had problems at his work and felt that he wasn't helping us. And because he felt like that, he had started to drink, and all he wanted to do was run away from his problems and responsibilities. But he wanted to come back. He wanted to correct his mistakes and promised to be a good father to me. My mom really didn't want to accept him back, but I was so happy, and I wanted to give him a second chance. So we had an arrangement that he would live in a hotel for a few weeks, and if everything went well, he would move back to our house. I was so happy. My father was actively searching for a job, and he was present every day, helping around the house, repairing stuff, and even cleaning. He was a little bit reluctant to talk about those dark 5 years, but he said he was not proud of who he was before. He said that the worst thing about it was missing seeing me grow up. Even my mom started to soften up to him a little bit. I was so happy and confident, and I felt that my life had become so much better. In fact, I even started to date. I knew this was a good time for it because everything in my life had started going smoothly. Basically, I stopped being scared of relationships like I was before. A month or so passed and everything changed. My dad still couldn't find a new job, and he almost stopped helping at home. He mostly watched TV and drank beer, and if my mom tried to talk some sense into him, he would get very annoyed and angry and would say that he had tried very hard and that we should appreciate his efforts. I was on his side and told Mom that she shouldn't be so mean to him. But then I came to my senses after one very awkward evening. I finally decided that it was time to meet my parents, so we planned for him to come for dinner. At first, everything went very smooth, and well, there was a lot to like. I think he was the opposite of my dad in a way, and my dad noticed it. His hands are too soft, and boys were different back in my day. And he continued to make these awkward jokes until my mom politely said to him that it was time to stop saying those things and to stop drinking. My father then got really angry at her, saying how she ruined his life and a lot of other really unpleasant stuff. But when my father started to say stuff about my mom, he interrupted him and said that it was not very nice and he should stop. His voice was trembling and he was scared of my father, but he still tried to protect me and my mom. And it didn't help, it only made my father more angry. My mom then lost her temper and shouted at my father like I've never heard her scream. She said that he didn't change and that he was the same bad person as he was 5 years ago and that she didn't want him in our house. I wanted to feel bad for my father, but I didn't. I knew he was a bad person and I knew that he didn't change, and it was so hard to accept this. So in a few days, he left again, and this time it was for good. I felt like it was my fault again, and like I couldn't trust people anymore, especially men. But my mom said to me that not every man is like my father. She said that he tried to protect us even though he was scared, and that not every guy would do that. And he stayed with me even after this awkward dinner. And my mom has finally started to date again. I still feel bad about my father, but I'm glad that I have really good people around me.
Hi everyone. I think every teenager has faced some problems with their parents or at school with their peers. And I can vouch for the fact that this has a huge impact on their life. But the impact is not necessarily a negative thing, like you might think. Just listen to my story, about my discouraging childhood, which still couldn't break me down, despite some pretty bad circumstances. I was born in a small town near London, into quite a regular English family. We were not poor, but sometimes had troubles with money. My parents have always been quite supportive of me, especially my mum. She used to say that she always knew how special I was. She'd noticed that I'd had some troubles with the coordination of my movements and eyesight when I was a kid. When I'd grown up a little bit, it had become evident that numbers and letters didn't make sense to me. Hence, doctors at some point diagnosed me with dyslexia. So now you can probably imagine how challenging my life at school was. Mum did her best to get me adapted to normal life, so that I didn't feel uncomfortable with my peers. However, her parenting methods might not seem very normal at first sight. For example, there was a moment when we were going to Granny's house in Devon. I think I must have been misbehaving, or something like that, in the back seat, because Mum pushed me out the car and said that I should find my own way there. There were about 3 miles left to go, and I was 4 years old. Even though many years have passed since then, I still feel the fear that I felt back then, standing there alone, surrounded by an endless field. I had nothing left to do but go. I didn't make it there until it had gotten dark. I was tired and starving, and maybe even angry. I don't exactly remember. But when Mum opened the door, she behaved as though nothing actually happened. And I also remember, one winter morning, it was snowy and cold outside, when my mum woke me up, handed me my bike, and sent me to our relatives like 50 miles away from home. She said it was really important to reach them. She gave me some food, like an apple and a sandwich, and said that I had to get water somewhere on my own. It was hard and chilly to ride a bike in snowy weather. The whole way I kept wondering why fate had given me such a harsh mum. I almost got lost twice, since I could barely read the road signs. I probably never felt more exhausted than when I finally reached my destination that day. Tough approach, you might say. Yeah. What mother could ever do that to her beloved son, right? But all this stuff definitely built my character. Despite some natural disabilities, I rarely got ill and formed a strong habit of never giving up. My years at school were full of tribulations from my everyday life. According to some sort of family tradition, my parents sent me to an all-boys school, and teachers there were never forbidden to beat us for any shortcoming. I had plenty of them, as you might already have guessed. Teachers literally considered me the dumbest person they'd ever met. Well, I guess they were right, since I couldn't answer any of their questions. Nobody realized that I was nearsighted. It took them a couple of semesters to find me the perfect glasses, but I still couldn't study well, being dyslexic. I tried my skills on the playing field, but, I just couldn't make myself become an athlete. I nearly failed school, constantly being punished for not reading well, for not knowing the diameter of a circle, for having dirty shoes, or for poorly making my bed. Of course, at first, things like these were scary, painful, and humiliating. But at some point I got used to them, to a certain extent, so that when any of my teachers would beat me, I'd say how grateful I was for their efforts. Thank goodness my classmates never bullied me, since virtually all of them were in the same position as me, in terms of severe punishments. I hated the very situation that I had to be at that school. Having realized that I needed something more than just studying, back then, I had tried to set up a business venture a couple of times. I'm extremely fortunate that my parents nurtured my entrepreneurial spark and supported my dreams, whatever they were. At first, I tried my luck at growing and selling Christmas trees, but I wasn't successful in it. Because of rabbits, those intrusive chiselers had eaten all the first springs. I got so angry that I decided to get revenge. I started hunting them, but unfortunately, I was only able to sell a few carcasses for a song. It was much less than I initially invested in the fir trees, but it had turned out to be enough for another business. I decided to breed budgerigars and sell them. My dad had even constructed a huge cage for them. But one day when I was back to school, after another holiday, Mum called me and said that rats ate all of the birds. What was wrong with the animals around me, I thought. Only, a few years later, Mum confessed that she was to blame because she had let the birds fly away since they were too loud and too expensive to look after. It was sort of a devastating period in my life. However, I never doubted I could make things happen. When I was 13, I transferred to a new boarding school where a new level of struggle began. I still had bad grades, but my low academic performance, as professors have called it, prompted me towards kind of a revolutionary road. I had some serious thoughts on my new school's reformation, which I shared with the headmaster. For example, I thought that it had been really stupid and meaningless to make all students attend soccer games. Why would you make the weaker ones watch how the stronger ones are playing if they didn't want to? There had to be some justice in terms of how students spend their free time. Also, I suggested that the school cafeteria could have been transformed into some sort of food bar instead, so that it not only makes students feel more comfortable, but also saves money on extra staff. I felt how a tiny sparkle of a bright future began building inside of me. Of course, the headmaster didn't take me seriously. I was probably so annoying. He actually even said that I'll either go to prison or become a millionaire. I'd prefer the second option. Eventually, I dropped out of school at 16 without even graduating, having realized it was not where I wanted to be. My revolutionary views were supported by my best friend. So, we decided to create a magazine with a focus on students, since they had begun taking an active interest in maintaining a social life. Unfortunately, neither I nor my business partner had any money to invest in it. As fate would have it, my mum, my eternal supporter, found a necklace on the street and gave it to the police. After months without anyone stepping forward to claim the jewelry, she got it back, sold it, and gave the money to me. In today's money, its purchasing power was somewhere around $2,000. We used it to pay off the magazine's electricity and postage bills. I was so grateful to her for that. Sometime later, we managed to find some powerful advertisers to help us publish the magazine, and had a couple of interviews with some really popular musicians. This was actually how my first step towards a grown-up life brought me success and made me kickstart my whole business empire. A few years later, after the magazine launch, I would found a mail-order record business. I eventually managed to expand of more than 100 companies and 60,000 employees worldwide, encompassing airlines, a music label, and even space travel. My general attitude towards life is to enjoy every minute of every day. I never do anything with the feeling of, oh God, I've got to do this today. And I really do hope that my story proves that there are no life circumstances that are able to prevent you from being who you are. Remember, your personality is the only matter that's able to determine your future.
Hey guys, I'd like to share with you how I almost ruined my mom's hope for a happily ever after story by being way too suspicious about her new boyfriend. But let me give you some background first. I've lived with my mom for my whole life. I never even knew my father, and my mom's parents died before I was even born, so it was always just the two of us in the family. Mom worked hard as a waitress and at a dry cleaner, and she's always been quite a romantic daydreamer when it comes to guys. Every time she meets a man, she's sure that he's the one. She falls in love fast, and then cries on my shoulder completely broken-hearted at the end. I, on the other hand, try to be more realistic, but still supportive of her. I knew for now that I was her only constant defender, and I always at least tried to act like a real grown-up man. For example, when Mom finished her job too late one night, I met her when she was coming home from work, since the block of the city we live on is not that great. I was okay with taking care of Mom, even though I still had some growing up to do, and we did pretty well most of the time. That's about it for the history. Now let's get into the actual story. One night, Mom was getting ready for another date, and as usual, I was trying to calm her down and instruct her so she wouldn't be so overly affectionate and trusting, at least on the first date. She was very inspired and excited about the guy she was going out with that night, which made me start to think this was a bad sign, and that she was going to have her heart broken again. When somebody knocked on the door, I went to open it and saw the guy. I can't actually say why, but he seemed different from any of my mom's previous dates, and I wasn't sure if that was bad or good. He was sort of polite and well-dressed. I mean, not like a rich person, but still like a gentleman, and he even had a small bouquet of flowers with him. Our interaction lasted for about a minute, and then the two of them left. But for no actual reason that I could pinpoint, I found myself suspicious about him. Something was definitely wrong with him, I thought. The next day, I saw how happy my mom was. She had that in-love smile on her face and was singing some sort of love song in a soft voice. I immediately recognized the signs of her having fallen in love again. Of course, I started to ask questions about the guy, wondering who he was and how he earned his living. I don't know exactly if it was because Mom was tired of my questions or because this man was really special for her, but she told me to save all my questions to ask him directly at a dinner we were all having together this coming Friday. I had never eaten with any of my mom's boyfriends before, but since the meal was on him, I didn't actually mind. On Friday evening, we were already sitting in a cozy little restaurant, having a pretty good meal, and that made me feel like I had some control over him. I began questioning him about his past. He said that at first, he worked as a sales representative in one firm, but then the company went bankrupt and then he didn't have an income for a little while. Then he began working as an odd jobber since he was skilled in plumbing, woodworking, and so on. But then he told me something that infuriated me. He said that once, the house he'd been working on had been robbed and he was accused of it and went to jail. To me, this just meant that from all the men on the earth my mom had to pick from, she had chosen a felon. I couldn't believe what I'd heard, and I couldn't let my mom date a former prisoner. That's why, even unexpectedly for myself, I just grabbed my mom and left the restaurant without finishing our meal. Mom and I stayed silent the whole way home. I knew she was angry at my reaction, but I believed it was the only right thing to do. The next day, I could tell that she was still angry at me. I, on the other hand, did want to cheer her up and tried my best to act as if nothing actually happened back there at the restaurant. But then suddenly, my mom, who has always been easygoing and smiley, angrily said that I had no right to do what I'd done. Her reaction made me furious. Wasn't she the one who had always insisted on the fact that I was almost a man and responsible for her? We started our quarrel and I ended up saying that if she keeps associating with that man, I'll leave her and she won't ever see me again. Of course, I didn't mean to do that. I just wanted to influence her decision. But she kept on doing whatever she wanted and acted really dramatic when she was preparing for another date with him. I was outraged, but I couldn't come up with anything to do to prevent their relationship. Then a thought came to my mind that if my normally obedient mom had decided to rebel this time, maybe this guy was special. The only thing I had left to do was to try to speak to him one more time. The next morning I found myself with Mom's cell phone in my hands texting on her behalf that he needed to come over to talk. Mom had no idea what I had done. At the agreed upon time, I met him halfway and decided to give him a second chance to explain everything. He really had stolen that money from the house, but he literally had nothing to pay for his living expenses at the time. And he was going to return all the money, but instead got caught by the police. No one believed him, and he was taken to jail. He has been strictly punished for his deed and no longer works as an odd jobber. Now he works in a crisis center with minors who are in trouble with the law. He teaches them woodworking, plumbing, and everything he himself knows, so they have the ability to earn some money with honest employment. You know, I was embarrassed and felt really sorry about what I'd done. I didn't mean to offend him, and I actually had ruined the relationship between him and my mom, and made them both unhappy, but I knew how I could figure everything out. I arranged another meeting with him later that day at our apartment. I made a dinner for him and Mom, keeping everything in secret from her, and when he came in, she was really surprised. You should have seen how tenderly they looked at each other. I left the house, letting them spend some time alone. I knew that he was still a former prisoner, and he did what he did, but everyone, I think, deserves a second chance to become happy. You see, the fact that I felt like I had to be a parent to my mother really played an evil trick on me, and in turn made me overconfident about making some snap judgments without fully thinking them through. I've now realized that no one is allowed to pin labels on anyone else without having first walked in his or her shoes. Since that evening, Erwin and I have a pretty good relationship, and I see a twinkle in Mom's eyes and feel happy for her, and these things make me happy.
Hi. Several times in my life, other people's stories have helped me a lot, so I decided to submit my own story that has been happening over the last year, and writing it out turned out to be harder than I thought. Anyway, here's what I got. For as long as I can remember, my family was always doing well. I was born when my parents were already in their 30s, and even before they became a couple, they were business partners. They started out as the only employees in a tiny office in 1999, and in 10 years grew to be owners of a prominent cargo transportation business. So growing up, I have always had everything I needed and wanted. We lived in a really big house, more of a mansion, with a pool and a playroom for me. But even though I grew up privileged, I remember I was always eager to share and to help others. Throughout my life, my friends were always welcome at our house for pool parties and sleepovers. And when some of them reacted in a strange way, I never thought that they might be jealous. But yeah, I guess sometimes I may have sounded rude or even mean, because I lived in my own little world and didn't understand the struggles some of my friends and their families had. So for me, the events in this story started happening around about a year ago. My parents had had stressful times before because of their work, but it was never like this. Both my mom and dad started to get really nervous every day, especially when there was any conversation about money. And of course, I noticed changes in the way we lived. We used to have 3 cars, and one of them was waiting for me to be old enough to drive. 2 of them had now disappeared. A lot of valuable stuff we had in our house, like little statuettes or works of art, were also vanishing. I tried to ask my parents what was going on, but Mom would say that everything was fine every time. Like a broken record. and Dad would just leave the room, change the subject, or simply ignore the question. But one day I found out. I couldn't fall asleep at night, and I went to the kitchen to get some water. My parents were there having some edgy conversation, and I stopped before entering and listened for a while. I didn't hear the whole story, but what I got was that their business was failing and that they were spending most of their time in court now. They had to sell stuff to cover the expenses, and we were basically broke. Later I found out the details because I made my parents talk to me. Their business problems had started more than 2 years ago, but Mom and Dad had been sure that things would eventually work out. Until it was too late. I was determined to stay positive. If we had to start saving, I was fine with it. But it didn't take long for me to go all the way to complete despair. I didn't have trouble with the situation itself. I had trouble with the details. Like when I couldn't afford to go to a concert or to go shopping anymore. Yes, I know how whiny that sounds, but it was a huge shock for me since I never lived like that. Now sometimes I couldn't even afford to have a pizza with my friends, so I'd make up excuses to stay home. It was not easy for my mom either. She looked broken, wouldn't leave the house for weeks, and just sat in the kitchen watching TV. We lived on the money we got from selling the rest of our stuff. And several months afterward, our old life had officially come to an end. We had to sell our house and move into a tiny apartment. That's when I started to feel terrible. There were several times where I would just blame my parents for all of this out loud. And what shocked me the most was that they didn't even answer me. They just got more and more upset. My life had changed more than I could imagine. I lost touch with a lot of my friends who were well off, and that was not about them. I was too embarrassed to keep going out with them. Of course, pretty soon my classmates found out, and the guys and girls who used to be jealous of me were visibly happy. Once that happened, I just got more and more miserable. The person who gave me some real motivation was my dad. After several weeks of being depressed and having no idea what to do next, I made an effort to get out of this. I took a part of the money we got from selling the house and went to Alaska. My uncle lives there, and he invited my dad out to try to start a new business. Having nothing to lose, Dad decided to give it a shot. Kind of inspired me. I started to take it all easier, and I stopped blaming my parents. My classmate lives with her grandparents in the city during the week, so she's closer to school, while her parents live on a farm not too far away. And every summer, her dad invites friends to stay there for as long as they want, helping around the farm, breathing fresh air, having fun, and so on. All of our families have known each other for a long time, so it's never a problem with parents. And after your stay ends, Dad pays you a salary for all the help. No one goes there for the money anyway. It's just a bonus. But money was my primary motivation when I said I wanted to go after I overheard the girls talking about it in late April. No one believed me at first. They thought that it was some kind of mean joke since I'd never shown any interest before. And it took me a while to convince them that I was dead serious. Long story short, in early June, I arrived at the farm. My stay there is kind of a separate story. I learned so much stuff and I've done so many new things, most of which were outside my comfort zone. So it wasn't easy at first. After the first 2 days, I wanted to pack my things and leave. But after a month, when I already had to go back, I didn't want to leave. I loved this time so much and even earned about $300. This was my first paycheck ever. So now I'm back and writing this story. My dad is super busy, so we don't talk very often, but the news he's got is quite promising. Mom has seen a therapist and become more positive too. Now I'm sure we will be fine. I hope this was helpful to someone. Please don't be mean in the comments and share your own stories. I know there's a way out of anything, and even if times get hard, it's gonna be better soon.